You're not family. Sit in the back, she whispered, loud enough for the entire front row to hear. I stood there holding my gift, my hands suddenly cold. Then a calm voice behind me said, "That's not how this works. My name is Danielle Harper, and I'm 34 years old. I work as a school counselor at a public middle school. It's not glamorous work. I don't drive a luxury car or wear designer clothes to parent meetings. But I show up every single day for kids who feel invisible. And I've never once been ashamed of that. When I married into the Whitmore family 3 years ago, I walked into a world that measured people by zip codes and bank balances. My mother-in-law, Renata Whitmore, made it clear from the very first dinner that I was not what she had imagined for her son. She smiled at me during holidays, but the smile never reached her eyes. I tried anyway. I helped plan the family reunion. I stayed quiet during arguments that weren't mine to start. I brought food to gatherings nobody asked me to bring anything to. I learned the names of distant cousins. I remembered birthdays. My husband, Connor, loved me. I believe that. But when it came to his mother, he had a habit of looking somewhere else whenever she aimed her words at me. I wasn't rich. I wasn't from their world. But I had something they never bothered to look for. I paid attention. I watched. I remembered everything. And that habit, the quiet one they laughed at, was about to change everything. If you've ever been treated like you didn't belong simply because of where you came from, this story is for you. Hit subscribe before we go any further. And tell me in the comments, have you ever stayed completely quiet just to keep the peace? Because I did that for years. Like and hype this video if you're ready to hear what finally happened when I stopped. The wedding was for Connor's younger sister, Priya. She was marrying into another wealthy family, and the event was exactly what you'd expect. A rented estate. Tall white flower arrangements. Staff in matching uniforms. The kind of wedding where the centerpieces cost more than my monthly rent. I arrived early. I wore a navy dress I had bought specifically for the occasion. Appropriate and elegant. I carried a carefully wrapped gift, something personal and thoughtful that I had spent 2 weeks choosing. I was walking toward the front seating area, the section clearly marked for family, when Renata appeared beside me like she had been waiting. "Immediate family only," she said, placing one hand gently on my arm in a way that looked polite from a distance. "You'll sit in the back, Danielle." Someone nearby turned to look. Then someone else. "I'm Connor's wife," I said quietly. "And this is Priya's day," she replied. "Don't make it complicated." I felt the heat rise in my face. I looked around for Connor. He was standing 20 feet away, talking to an uncle, his back to me. I walked past 12 rows of guests. I felt every single set of eyes track my movement. I sat down next to a woman I had never met, who gave me a kind but confused smile. Later, during cocktail hour, Renata introduced me to her friend with a small wave of her hand. "This is Danielle," she said. "Just the wife." She laughed. Her friend laughed. I smiled and said nothing. But I noticed the man in the gray suit sitting 3 tables away. He wasn't eating. He was watching. He had a small notepad and a pen resting beside his water glass. He looked at me once, briefly, and then looked away. The photographs came next. A coordinator in a headset moved people into position near the garden arch. "Immediate family to the front, please," she called out. I stepped forward. Renata was already there. She turned, looked at me, and said, "We'll get one with the extended group later. You can wait." I stepped back. I stood at the edge of the path for 20 minutes while Connor smiled and posed. He looked at me once. I looked back at him. He turned toward the camera. That was the first betrayal of the afternoon. The second came near the catering station. I wasn't trying to overhear anything. I was pouring myself a glass of water when Renata's voice carried from around the corner. "She works with children at a school," she was saying. "It's sweet, I suppose. But it's hardly a career." Laughter again. I set down the glass carefully. The third came when a family friend opened my gift at the table. The framed collection of photographs I had personally curated of Connor and Priya growing up, printed and arranged by hand. Renata glanced at it and said, "Oh, how simple." She set it aside and reached for the next envelope. I watched Connor look at the frame. Something moved across his face. Then he picked up his drink. I stopped feeling hurt somewhere around that moment. The feeling that replaced it was colder and much more focused. The man in the gray suit had moved closer. He was now speaking quietly to one of the venue staff. He tucked something into the inside pocket of his jacket and checked his watch. What they didn't know was that I had seen certain documents weeks before that wedding. 6 weeks earlier, Connor had come home distracted. He mentioned offhandedly that his grandfather's estate lawyers had reached out about updating some paperwork. He said it wasn't important. He said he'd handle it. 2 days later, a letter arrived addressed to me directly. Not to Connor. To me. It was from a lawyer named Gerald Ashworth. He asked to meet privately, and he was very specific about that word. Privately. I met him at a coffee shop near my school. He was careful and precise with his words. He told me that Connor's grandfather, an elderly man named Howard Whitmore who I had met exactly twice, had made a quiet decision in the final months of his life. He had watched how the family treated people. He had watched how I was treated. And he had made a change. Gerald told me there was a document I would be asked to sign. He told me not to sign it. He also told me to come to the wedding. Gerald Ashworth had been the Whitmore family's legal counsel for over 30 years. He knew where every document was filed. He knew what every clause meant. He had watched the family grow. And he had watched what it had grown into. He had contacted me privately because he believed I was the only person connected to that family who could be trusted with what Howard had decided. When I saw him at the wedding, it all made sense. 3 weeks before the ceremony, Renata had pushed Connor to have me sign a document that she described as a family financial agreement. She said it was routine. Connor brought it home and placed it on the kitchen table, with a pen already uncapped. I read every line. I didn't sign it. When I told Connor I wasn't comfortable with it, he said I was overthinking things. He said his mother just wanted everything to be organized. He took the document back and I never saw it again. What I didn't tell Connor was that I had already sent photos of every page to Gerald Ashworth. Gerald called me the next morning. "You did exactly the right thing," he said. "Now trust me and trust the timing." At the reception, I watched him. He stayed calm while Renata grew louder. He stayed seated while she controlled every corner of the room. He checked his watch a second time and straightened his jacket. He caught my eye across the table and gave one small nod. They made a mistake, he had told me at that coffee shop. They assumed that being quiet means being powerless. You've proven otherwise simply by paying attention. I held that sentence in my chest through every humiliation of that day. The reception speeches began just after 7 in the evening. The room smelled of white roses and warm candle wax. The sound of glasses and silverware had settled into quiet anticipation. Renata stood first, which surprised no one. She tapped her glass and smiled at the room like she owned it, because in every way she believed she did. She spoke about legacy. She spoke about bloodlines. She used the phrase "our family" 4 times in the first 2 minutes, each time with a slight emphasis that felt directed somewhere specific. "The Whitmore name," she said, lifting her glass, "stands for something. It always has. And today we welcome another family into that tradition. People who understand what it means to belong." She looked at Priya. She looked at Priya's new husband. She looked at Connor. She did not look at me. Then Gerald Ashworth stood up. He didn't tap his glass. He simply rose from his chair. And something about the stillness of it made the room go quiet on its own. "I apologize for the interruption," he said, in a tone that did not sound like an apology at all. "But there is a legal matter connected to this family that requires immediate clarification. I have an obligation to address it before this evening concludes." Renata's smile stiffened. "Gerald, this is hardly the time." "It is exactly the time," he said. "Howard Whitmore made that clear in writing." He reached into his jacket and removed a folded set of documents. He explained, calmly and without drama, that Howard Whitmore had updated his will and family trust in the final months of his life. The revision had been witnessed, notarized, and legally filed. It could not be contested. In that document, Howard had named Danielle Harper as the principal decision-maker over the management of a family charitable trust that held significant assets. His reasoning, written in his own words and read aloud by Gerald, was direct. He had observed over several years, which members of his family treated outsiders with dignity. Only one had done so consistently. The document also referenced an attempt, within the past 60 days, to have that same person sign away any potential standing she might hold in family legal matters. That attempt, Gerald noted, had rendered the people who initiated it ineligible to contest any part of Howard's revised estate plan. Renata set down her glass. Connor's face had gone completely still. I stood up slowly. I wasn't angry. There was nothing to be angry about anymore. I walked to where Gerald was standing, and I looked at Renata directly for the first time all day. You told me I wasn't family, I said. My voice was even and quiet. But as it turns out, the law has a different opinion. I didn't stay for the rest of the reception. Gerald walked me out, and we sat in the venue's small side garden while he explained my options. He was thorough and patient, and he answered every question I had. The position Howard had given me was not about money. It was about oversight and integrity. It was exactly the kind of responsibility I had spent my entire career preparing for without ever knowing it. Connor found me outside an hour later. He wanted to explain. He said he hadn't known what his mother had been doing. He said he was sorry for staying quiet. I listened. I told him that sorry was a starting point, not a resolution. I told him that if our marriage was going to survive, we needed honest conversations that we had been avoiding for 3 years. He nodded. I wasn't sure yet what would come next for us, but I knew what I would no longer accept. Renata's hold over the family's legal and financial decisions was gone. The attempt to cut me out had, in the end, permanently cut her off instead. I don't take joy in that. I take clarity from it. I drove home that night alone, past streetlights in quiet neighborhoods, thinking about Howard Whitmore, a man I barely knew who had seen something in me worth protecting. They tried to seat me in the back. They tried to make me invisible. They handed me a pen and expected me to sign myself out of my own story. I just kept paying attention. And in the end, that was enough. Have you ever been humiliated publicly by someone who believed they had total power over you? Have you ever smiled through something that should have broken you? I want to hear your story. Share it in the comments, because this community is built on people who have been underestimated and came back stronger. Subscribe if you've ever had to reclaim your dignity in front of an audience that expected you to fall apart. Give this video a hype and help it reach someone who needs to hear it today. Your story has power. If something in mine connected with you, please subscribe and share your experience below. Every hype you give this video puts it in front of someone else who has been told they don't belong. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening.